Greetings. Welcome to Simmer's Morning Skate, also known in the Seattle and Vancouver markets as Crackin' Knuckleheads, a podcast that covers a lot of ground. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome in the author of this book, The Grind Line, as well as a handful of others. It's Keith Cave. Keith,
How you
how are
doing,
you?
Simmer? Good to see you, man.
Yeah, man.
It's
It's great
been
to
a
be
little
talking.
minute.
Great to be talking to you. Yeah, it's been a while. I think the last time I may have seen you, I was at a movie premiere for The Russian Five.
Yeah.
I think we interviewed you maybe in studio at SiriusXM, did we not?
No, we were
Just
on
on the
the phone.
phone?
We were on the
Okay.
phone. Yeah, yeah,
Did I?
yeah. We had a very nice chat with you and Gord. Yeah,
Yeah,
about the Russian Five.
it was fun. Oh, you know what? Where I saw you was actually at Traverse City.
Correct for the prospects tournament, which no longer exists. By the way, it's died a slow death, and it's pretty much gone now.
Yep.
No teams coming to Traverse City this year. Detroit's going to Dallas for like a 3 day little mini thing, and that's it. We can't get 8 teams to Traverse City anymore. It breaks my heart because one of the coolest events of the entire hockey season for me. You see all these 18 to 20-year-old prospects, best on best, 8 teams, coaches, scouts, general managers, sometimes owners, all in that little tiny rink there, 2 sheets of ice, it's like a mini NHL meeting,
Yep.
and it's gone, and it's sad to me.
I wonder if part of it just has to be Kenny Holland was kind of the man behind it all.
You're
And
right.
maybe it's just died the slow death since Kenny
It,
moved
it,
along.
you're absolutely right, Simmer. You're absolutely right. Kenny got all of his buddies who like to golf. Great golf courses up there in Northeast Michigan, right?
Yep.
And golfing, fishing in Grand Traverse Bay, and so on. And he made it a big deal. It was kind of a thing that I think he hit it pretty hard in terms of inviting teams and so on. And I don't think Steve Eiserman, love the guy. I've known him since he was a kid, but he doesn't have the same drive to make this event happen that Ken Holland had.
Right. There's a lot going on there.
Yep,
It was always easy to get Jimmy Nill and the Dallas Stars to come up or whatever. But
that's right.
getting 8 teams, you're right, though. I just remember some of the MVPs of that tournament that came
Oh,
rolling through there. It's unbelievable. Alex
yes,
DeBrincat, by the way, I think was an MVP of that one year when he was with Chicago. And of
yes,
course, now he's a
yes,
Red Wing. Farmington Hills kid, right?
yep.
Let's talk about this. I'm just wrapping it up. I have about 15, 20 pages in the very back to go through, which is actually
Uh,
kind of a list of some of the greats. The antidotes, Keith, are tremendous. I love, in particular, besides the background on the members of the grind line, such an important line in history, is your grindstones, the antidotes near the end. There's some fabulous
yes,
stories tucked away in there. But
little
any Red
nuggets.
Wings fan and any hockey NHL fan at all should pick this up because you've you mentioned it here. Forget the number fourth line. This is simply one of the great lines and more important lines in history that was together for a long time with a kind of a rotating right wing at one point.
Correct. Yes, yes, yes.
What stands out for you in terms of putting this together? I mean, obviously, it must have been fun as hell talking to these guys.
Well, it was absolutely. You're right about that. And the things they shared with me, I got stories that they haven't told anybody else that made it a lot of fun, right? But what gave me the idea for this story is I was doing a little bit of for this book. I was doing a little bit of research. In Detroit, I don't know whether it's the blame of the media sitting up at the press box. We don't have too many creative names for lines in the 98-year history of the Detroit Red Wings. There's the production line, of course, the greatest line in NHL history, right? And then we got the Russian Five, which isn't really a line, right?
Right.
It's a 5-man unit, and there's the grind line. Scotty Bowman put the Russian Five together and the grind line together. And when I was doing a little research, I said, boy, those guys, that production line, Gordie Howe and Ted Lindsay on either side of Sid Abel first, and then Alex Delvecchio, right? Those guys won a total of 14 Stanley Cup rings. Pretty impressive, right?
Yep.
So I said, these grind line guys, they won a little bit too, And you look at Chris Draper in the middle with Kurt Maltby on the left; those guys are attached at the hip. Then the grind line started with Joe Koster on the right, and then after a couple of years, Darren McCarty moved in and played on the right side there. Add up the Stanley Cup rings that those guys have, 14,
Right.
just like the production line.
Right.
And and I really still wasn't really sure of whether this would be a book or not. About a year ago, right now, I had lunch with Scotty Bowman. We met. And I wanted to pick his brain a little bit, and he was so effusive. I mean, you could tell that he loved the grind line every bit as much as he did the Russian Five.
Yep.
And as he said, and Scotty wound up writing the forward to this book. And but the one thing that sold it for me, he said, those four guys, they made all the difference.
Yep.
They dropped the puck in the Stanley Cup Finals in '97 against Philadelphia in Philadelphia against the Legion of Doom line, Eric Lindros, right, Leclaire and Michael Renberg. Who's going to play against the Legion of Doom? It was Stevie Eisenman going to take, a Selke Award winner, Sergei Fedorov, Selke Award winner. Is he going to play against us? No, they put the grind line out there to start the Stanley Cup Finals against Philadelphia when everybody in North America is picking the Flyers to win the Stanley Cup. To do it, the same thing to Detroit that New Jersey did 2 years earlier in '95 when they swept Detroit. Remember?
Yeah.
And what happened? The grind line scored 2 goals in the first period. They had a 2-1 lead after 20 minutes, and it was downhill from there. I mean, as like Scotty said, they set the tone. They made all the difference.
Yep. And then McCarty ends up with the cup winner, correct? With the beauty by solo effort into the zone. It's one of the great Red Wing goals of all time.
I swear, Sergei Fedorov swapped jerseys with him on, because I mean, that was one of the prettiest goals you'll see from a grinder.
Yeah.
Darren McCarty. It was pretty remarkable.
I'll just never forget coming. I'm sure I was one of a million, came out of their seat just like, what the was that?
And exactly. And like he says, Eric Lindros didn't score a goal until the last minute of game 4, right? To make it a 2-1 hockey game. And like Darren says, that's why Eric Lindros is the first guy I send a Christmas card to every year.
Right.
Because that goal that he scored made my goal the Stanley Cup winner.
That's right. And what a beauty. I remember here's 4 things that stand out. I mean, I've covered some Stanley Cup finals, ones that involved the Red Wings, but I was a fan in the '98 playoffs against a final against Washington. I was upstairs for game 1, down second row for game 2. Some insider trading there. With some buddies. And there's 4 things that stand out. One was watching Murphy and Lidstrom work together at the back end. It was like, these guys it's like, this is a well-oiled machine. Like, this is just beautiful to watch. Secondly, and I brought this up with Scotty Bowman last week, we did a podcast with Scotty, was talking about Sergei Fedorov skating. It was just like a beautiful power, like just incredible to watch him skate. The fans at the Joe in game 2, it was a seesaw back and forth. I think the Wings, if I'm not mistaken, came back 3 times in that game before winning it in overtime. That crowd lifted the team. Like, it was one of the few occasions in my life where I remember an audience literally picking a team up just based on, they never gave up despite the 3 deficits. And then number 4, of course, your boy Chris Draper, after Esa Tikkanen misses an empty net, scores the game winner in game 2 to win it. Underrated. I mean, he wasn't nifty, skillsy willsy, but Draper, because I guess maybe because of his speed, he pulled off some magic.
Well, what Scotty Bowman liked about Chris Draper was his speed, number 1, but also his face-off ability. He could win face-offs, and they weren't a great face-off winning team, but when they got him as the left-hand guy, Steve Yzerman as the right-hand guy. They were set wherever they needed a good face-off man. They had 2. They liked that about him, and his compete level was off the chart, right? And he and Maltby, they found some chemistry, those 2 guys. And but back to Sergei for a second. You're right about his skating ability. What Scotty liked about Sergei's skating ability was how well he skated backwards.
Yeah.
He wanted to make him a defenseman. Said, Sergei, if you play defense, you could win a Norris Trophy.
Right.
He's already won 2 Selkes and an MVP. Go win a Norris Trophy. That's why I say, Robin, I'm going to start something here, okay? If you don't mind.
Yep.
I'm enjoying watching Alex Ovechkin, probably maybe even this season, beat Wayne Gretzky's goal scoring record. But please don't come at me with this business about Alex Ovechkin being the best Russian hockey player ever in the NHL.
Yeah.
He wasn't. He's a very good player. He's the best goal scorer, Russian goal scorer in the NHL, no question. The best NHL Russian hockey player was Sergei Fedorov. He could play all five positions on the ice, all five. He could play, and he did. But again, I'm an MVP, 2 Selkes, a couple of 1, 2, 3 Stanley Cups, and so on. I'll take Sergei Fedorov against any Russian you want to take.
And by the way, I mean, Ovechkin's a horse. That's a big factor. He's an absolute beast.
Yes.
I actually I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but brought it up with Scotty and pushed him on it last week and said, okay, by the end of it, I said, all right, I'm putting you down. 91 goes to the rafters. So it's still a touchy subject, sounds like, or it's still in debate as to whether that's ever going to happen.
Yes. And you want the background on that?
Yeah, sure.
As long as Marian Ilitch is drawing a breath, she's the owner of the team still. That's not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
Sergei Fedorov betrayed the Detroit Red Wings twice. Yeah. After the Olympics in 1998 at Nagano, he held out. He wound up signing an offer sheet from the CompuWare owner Peter Karmanos in Carolina, and it was laden with bonuses. The Ilitches had to actually scramble with their banks to get the money to pay Sergei Fedorov about $28 million in a matter of about 3 months, right?
Yep.
Because they won another Stanley Cup. That was the first time. The second time was when they were trying to sign him in 2004, 2003. They're trying to sign him. And Jim Devellano, this gentleman, he was the senior vice president, and Ken Holland they're talking. Sergei's got a couple of agents going. Mike Barnett was one of them, but he had another guy, and they're talking with everybody trying to get a contract signed with Sergei. And Mike Ilitch, the owner at the time, said, we're going to get this set resolved right now. And he said, Jimmy, get Sergei in here. I want to meet with you, Ken Holland, and Sergei, and I'm going to get it done right now. And they brought Sergei in. They're just the 4 of them. And Mike Ilitch says, Sergei, here's the deal. I'm going to give you $10 million a year for 5 years. $50 million, you'll be a Red Wing for life.
Yep.
And Sergei said, well, thank you, Mr. Ilitch. I'll think about it and get back to you. And they shook hands and left. And as soon as he left, Mike Ilitch looked at the other 2 guys and said, okay, that's it. He's gone. They said, what do you mean, Mike? What do you think? If you have to think about an offer like that, it's not going to happen. A couple of days later, he signs for $40 million with Anaheim. He left $10 million on the table to leave Detroit.
Right.
And the Ilitches are all about loyalty.
Right.
And again, my feeling is as long as Marian is drawing a breath, that's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Part of that was there was some level of devotion there, and that was to Brian Murray.
Because no question about it.
Because
Brian was
Murray,
his first coach. That's right.
Brought him to
Brian
Detroit.
Was the coach and general manager.
Yep, brought him to Detroit originally, but still he picked that guy over the entire franchise. I mean,
that's right.
You wonder what's going on in his head. And there's outside factors, but
and I've talked to Scotty, I've talked to Jimmy D and Ken Holland, and they all felt like Sergei's father, Victor, had influenced that decision too. Yeah. Victor didn't like his son playing in Steve Yzerman's shadow. Right. He had a problem with that. Go get your own team, and Sergei did. I'm not sure it was Sergei as much as the people, like his father had a lot of influence on him. And, the theory is that that's one big reason why he decided to leave.
There's really interesting background stories on getting back to the grind line, of course, on all these guys and their origins. And it mostly kind of, I don't want to say rags to riches is the right terminology, but kind of underdogs at various points. One part that stands out for me is Darren McCarty. You went through his background and touched about some of the issues that he had. I remember being in the league doing television when he was in Calgary, and he was coming out of, he had the alcohol thing going and all that, was in a little bit of trouble. And to come back around and to continue on or reunite. And the same thing with Joey Kocher. He goes from the Rangers, and then He's in a beer league
He
at
was
the
in a beer
time that
league.
he rejoins the Red Wings. I mean, it's crazy.
I, I love Joe Kosa's story. I mean, and what he did to talk his way back into the league was really astounding. I think it bordered on treason, really, what he did. And because it was after they won the Stanley Cup in '97 with Joe Kosa on the grind line, and they're at Mike and Marion Ilitch's place. They're sitting around the fire pit, Stanley Cup celebration at the owner's place, and they're sitting around the fire pit with a beer. And Joey leans back and said, "Boys, I got a story to tell you." And he unloaded. Then finally he shared the great extent that he went to talk his way back in. When the Chicago Blackhawks came to town, he called uh, Bruce brother buddy Bob Probert and said, "Proby, you got to start some stuff. You got to beat some guys up a little bit so they think they know they really need me." And Probert did. He got a couple of his posse in Chicago, and they raised hell for a game in Detroit. Right? I mean, there was a brawl, fights all over the ice, and the brain trust in Detroit said, "Boy, we got to get tougher. Maybe we should think about bringing Joey Koser back." And they did. They sent him down to Texas to a minor league team down there for 6 or 7 games. Mark Howe, the pro scout for Detroit, they sent him down to look at him, brought him back. Scotty said, "What do you think? Can he play?" And Mark says, "Yeah, he can still play." And 2 weeks later, Koser was in the Detroit Red Wings uniform doing his thing. Remarkable.
Early on in the book, you talk about some of the famous lines because you mentioned, why isn't this line up there with the other names? And it should be. It's legendary. Uh, is there any other quote unquote? I think you mentioned Anaheim at one point. Might have been Rob Niedermayer's line. I'm not sure. And you might have mentioned an old Habs line. But in terms of the impression and the impact over a long period of time, they really are incomparable. I mean, you're talking about a 7 or 8 year consistent, if not longer, real
From '97 to
intense,
2008. Yeah.
yeah, intense impression made.
Yes.
And there might have been these kind of shorter versions of that in Montreal or Anaheim or elsewhere, but nothing to this extent.
No, no, and they had a lot of fans around the league. I remember talking to Doug MacLean, who was the assistant general manager in Detroit with Brian Murray, who made that trade with Winnipeg and got Chris Draper for a buck, right?
Yeah.
And and I talked to Doug at length, and he said, "Don't call those guys a fourth line. They weren't a fourth line. They were like a second line for a lot of teams, or a second and a half line, because they could score some too, besides check and intimidate and so on." And he said they're not a fourth line. And Scotty didn't like calling them a fourth line either. By the way, he called his names by the names of the center. The center, that was the Draper line. But I talked to Chris about this. He was a very proud Toronto boy. Comes from a hockey royalty, really, in the Toronto area. And I said, "What do you think about the fourth line?" He said, it's kind of what we were. If you number in the lines, what we were. And I said, if that's the case, there are a lot of people that I spoke with said you might be the greatest fourth line in the history of the NHL. And Chris said, "You know what? I'll take that all day long. Call us a fourth line. If you want to call us that, I'll take it." But they were better than the traditional fourth line of most teams. A lot better. They were, as Bowman said, and I'm repeating myself, they made all the difference, and they really did.
I'm glad you mentioned that little hockey royalty line, by the way, because the one thing about this, and I've written my own Red Wings book, The Winged Wheel, a lot of great photographs. Those 10, 12 years ago or so. In fact, it's my favorite book of the ones I've done. And I think it's the highest quality one, at least. The number of the pieces of information, the number of pieces of information that came out of here that I did not know was wonderful. And you just referred to the drapes and the royalty thing. I didn't know about it was either his father or grandfather played in the World Hockey Association. I didn't know
it was one of his uncles, but his father, his grandfather played, his father played, and a couple of uncles played, and now he's playing, and now his son Keenan is a Red Wings prospect
Right.
who's coming along. So it's 4 generations.
Yeah. There's amazing facts about these guys. And also we really learn some down and dirty about Scotty Bowman. So I've obviously he's 91 years old now, still
Yeah.
just absolutely smart as a whip, can remember
Yep.
ridiculous things like line changes in the 78 playoffs, stuff like that. He
Yes.
did it again
Yes.
last week. But
Yes.
you realize the discipline thing and just what a bastard he was to a lot of these guys, like no nonsense, full discipline. And we talk to him now and it's like, oh, it's Scotty. He's this nice guy
Yeah.
who's talking hockey.
Yeah.
But man, there was no screwing around.
Well, it was he was like that with his players, all of his players. He was like that with the media. I mean, I had my battles, really bad battles. Like this, our faces are this close together. We screaming at each other, exchanging spit. It's just some awful times. But the one thing I'll say about Scotty Bowman, like most of his players will say, you know what, Rob? He made me a better reporter. He made me work harder.
Yep.
I worked way harder, because he made me, and also I'm grateful as heck to Scotty Bowman for a couple of things. He put the Russian Five together, that turned out eventually a pretty good book and film that I was able to help put together.
Hell yeah.
And he put the grind line together. And most of all, Rob, he gave me a championship team to cover. That's
Yep.
what all reporters want, right? I mean, you're a beat guy. It's probably would be fun to cover a championship team. And I had a couple of them there with them.
Yep. Heck yeah. Really cool Scotty Bowman stories in here, just especially
Uh,
from the
and,
boys.
and I get along really great with them now. I send them a happy birthday note every when it's birthday time, and I'm going to see him again next week. We're going to hook up for lunch here. I'm in Florida actually right now, and
Oh, good.
it's just south of Sarasota where he is. I'm going to have dinner with Jimmy D on Saturday, Jim Devillano, and then lunch next week with Scotty.
Yeah, it's great some of the stories from being in the office with the boys and some of
Yeah,
some of
yeah,
the techniques he used to get to them. But I tell you what, that he's a wonderful guy, and it's just sometimes I had to pinch myself. I did the 2018 tour around the league. I went to 31 buildings and 31 consecutive nights, and I
right.
basically at the Tampa game, he and I sat next to each other for the entire game and watched it and
Yep,
talked hockey. It was just
yep.
unbelievable. And he wrote the foreword with Eiserman for my 2004 book about Ray Scapanello. So I think that was the really first time after he had retired that I had a chance to kind of get to know
Right.
him and get into it. Man,
Good.
it's just a joy. But God, the stories in here about the like Draper in his office. I think it was Drapes, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just kind of leans back and looks at the ceiling. It doesn't say anything. They're having an intense conversation about what's right and what's wrong, and are you going to play? And Drapes is like, "Do I say something? Like, what's going on here?" And he looks up and he goes, I think the line was the only thing really permanent in here is the light fixture.
And Chris says, "Okay,
It's like,
Scotty, I get it."
I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
guess I better step it up. It's beautiful.
Exactly. Yep.
All right. Where do we find it, my friend?
Anywhere you get books. Well, not so much in Canada, perhaps, but Amazon and any place online where you can buy books. They're in bookstores all over Michigan, at least. I don't know about outside of Michigan too much, but you can order it from any. You can order it from any bookstore or Amazon or anywhere. It's widely available.
Yeah, nowadays, as I say, Amazon's a go-to. And if you're
Right.
not an Amazon fan for whatever reason, which is possible given today's whatever,
In today's world, yes,
you can go on, you can find it, go online and just you'll
yes.
find it. It's the grind line, the gears that powered the Detroit Red Wings to the summit. And it's Keith Gave. We got to know through the Russian Five. And you have two or three other tomes
It,
out there.
two other books. Right after the Russian Five, I did another one. Basically, all the really good stuff that I couldn't fit in the Russian Five book, I put in another book called Vlad the Impaler. Got
Yep.
Vladimir Konstantinov with a Stanley Cup, and all the proceeds from that book are going to his special needs trust.
Nice.
So that was just a fun thing to do during the COVID lockdown for me. And then I wrote another book with a friend of mine, Tim Rapley, about the best rivalry in hockey today, in my view. USA women against hockey women, and it started in Nagano, Japan, when the Americans upset the widely heavily favored Canadians in Nagano for the first gold medal that women played in the Olympics. And we wrote a book called "A Miracle of Their Own,"
Nice.
and how hockey changed, how women's hockey that gold medal victory changed the game for little girls in the United States.
Yep.
There were girls teams. Not a lot of them, maybe in Canada, but in the United States, Cami Granado and that generation of young girls, they were playing with boys against boys. They were often the best player on the ice all the way through high school until they went to college. But they played with boys the whole time, and the crap that they had to go through to play that game we have full. The book is full of stories like that. It is my favorite book, actually. By the way, A
Fantastic.
Miracle of Their Own.
And it's, and that's the one time when the Olympics still is when all the focus women's hockey draws as many eyeballs as the men. It's pretty
Right.
impressive.
Right.
By the way, I call him Rappy. I know him very well. He's in Traverse
Yes.
City. He's in Traverse City.
Yes. Yes. He lives in
He,
Traverse City now.
he
Good.
moved
My
there.
good buddy.
Yeah, Eastern guy from kind of more Connecticut, New York, but he moved to Traverse City. Must be
Yes.
got to be 10 years ago now. But we spent a World Junior tournament together in Russia.
Yeah.
So Rappy and I go back. He's a lot of fun. He's got a lot of energy.
He does indeed. He does indeed.
One other fun reference for you, and you mentioned almost referred that night in the book, is when they eliminated Colorado in the '97 conference final to go to the Cup
Yeah.
final again.
Yeah.
Me and my high school friend and I, Steve, were at Dick O'Dowd's in Birmingham, which is 3 miles
Oh
from where
yeah.
I grew
Yeah.
up. Just happened to be in there drinking Guinness when basically the entire Red Wings team came in. I think it was minus Draper and minus Lidstrom. Everybody else was there. My
Wow.
buddy had a
Wow.
great conversation with Stevie Y, and I was sitting at a table drinking vodka with the Russians and Brendan Shanahan.
How cool is that?
Unbelievable. Yeah, pretty crazy. Got in a little trouble later on, I think, but that's a whole other story. All Vladdy said the whole time was hello, kept saying hello and
Hello.
vodka.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was pretty funny. By the
He's a
way,
beauty.
another Vladdy comment. I pressed Brian Leach on this when I was doing Rangers about 10 years ago or 12 years ago.
Hmm.
I said, Brian, you didn't deserve the Norris Trophy that year. Konstantinov. And being the humble guy that he is, Leach said, you're right.
You know what? I remember talking to Vladdy about that. When he finished runner up,
Yep.
finished second, and when we told him, he didn't even know. He didn't care about that stuff really.
Right.
He didn't care.
No.
But I said, Vladdy, you're one of the three finalists for the Norris Trophy. Best defenseman. He said, oh no. He said, that's Brian Leach. That's Brian Leach. So Vladdy was giving it
Leach.
to him before whether it's humility or what, Vladdy thought that Brian Leach deserved it. Genuinely, I know that. And here's the thing about had he not been injured in the limo accident a week after the '97 Stanley Cup, he would have won. He would have won a couple of Norris trophies probably.
Oh, yeah.
The one thing I know for sure is that Nick Lidstrom wouldn't have won 7 of them.
Right.
Because Vladdy would have got a couple, or they would have split votes, and more Norris trophies would have gone to people like Chris Pronger,
Yeah.
But Nick Lidstrom will be the first to tell you that he wouldn't have won those 7 if Vladdy was still his teammate. They probably would won another cup or 2 or 3.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's nice that Leach and him mutually
Absolutely, and I believe it's legitimate feeling on their part.
A little bit of that's New York versus Detroit throw from a media and a exposure standpoint, and one
That's
being
true.
Russian and one being American.
Yep. No
Because
question.
I'll tell you what, that year from an intimidation and a physical standpoint, no comparison.
No,
Absolute monster.
no.
Absolute
I mean,
monster.
as I always tell people, Vladdy is the guy I want in the foxhole with me when the bullets are flying.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
the guy.
Yeah.
That's the guy. Yeah.
Keith, a pleasure. We've gone a long way. We're going to hopefully share this with a hell of a lot of Red Wings fans. The Grind Line, and I appreciate your time. Enjoy sunny Florida. I see your tan is developing.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. Hey, Simmer, it's really, really good to catch up with you again. Thank you for the invitation. I really, really appreciate this. Thank you.
My pleasure.